Good morning. This is the mop up for May 30th, 2023. I'm David Feldman. Thanks to the far right Freedom Caucus, it took 15 rounds before Speaker Kevin McCarthy finally got elected. That was back in January. And now it looks like he's going to have as hard a time selling the new debt ceiling bill to the same people. This time he has practically every Democrat voting for it, I think. So that means, and again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think it means that this new debt ceiling bill will probably pass. And thanks to provisions in this new bill, we won't be discussing the debt ceiling until after the 2024 presidential election. The resolution to the debt ceiling standoff is called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It's about 100 pages. The result, this Fiscal Responsibility Act, is the result of round the clock negotiations between the Biden administration and House Republicans. McCarthy says it will be voted on this Wednesday, and he expects it to pass. From what we can tell, it looks like this agreement lifts the debt ceiling until January of 2025. The debt ceiling currently stands at $31.4 trillion. And until January of 2025, according to this new bill, it can go as high as it goes, depending on how much tax revenue the Treasury receives. There's no ceiling. It can go as high as it goes. Now, Republicans had passed a bill last month in the House agreeing to lift the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion. But this new bill allows the government to blow right past that if necessary. The new bill will reduce Biden's $80 billion IRS spending bill down to $70 billion. So they're clawing back $10 billion on the IRS spending bill, which was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it will limit how long able-bodied Americans can remain on food stamps, while also imposing some work requirements for food stamp recipients who aren't homeless or veterans. There are no work requirements for Medicaid, which is what Republicans wanted. By the way, for those of you watching overseas, Medicaid is health care for those who can't afford health insurance. Like all of us need Medicaid. Nobody can afford health insurance. And while Medicaid is funded by the federal government, it's administered by the states in block grants. Medicare, different from Medicaid, Medicare is for seniors and it's administered entirely by the federal government. It's sort of universal health care. It works. It works. Even though Republicans are trying to privatize it and destroy it, Medicare works, and we could solve the entire healthcare crisis by giving Medicare to everyone. Now, overall, this new debt ceiling bill reduces spending by $650 billion over the next decade, while at the same time it increases spending on defense because, of course, it increases spending on defense. But here's the problem for McCarthy. The far-right Republican Freedom Caucus doesn't like this bill. And because their votes aren't necessary for it to pass, they can really turn up the heat starting today and Wednesday. They're going to openly dislike this bill. A turd sandwich is how Texas Republican Chip Roy describes it. But then again, it's Chip Roy. So I don't know if a turd sandwich for Chip Roy is a good thing or a bad. I'll go with bad. But you can be sure that Chip Roy has eaten his fair share of turd sandwiches. Georgia Republican Congressman Andrew Clyde, who hands out AR-15 lapel pins because he owns one of the largest gun stores in America, and famously referred to the January 6 insurrectionists as quote-unquote tourists, he says of the new bill, hard pass. But then there's the equally detestable member of the Freedom Caucus, Jim Jordan. I think he was one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus. Well, he's for the bill. Why? Because he got more committee assignments than he can handle after supporting Kevin McCarthy's bid for Speaker. So, not surprisingly, he supports the budget agreement because he supports Kevin McCarthy, because Kevin McCarthy gives him all these plum assignments. Now, some Democrats I've heard from are quietly saying it looks like Biden outmaneuvered McCarthy on this. But you got to consider the source. These are people who voted for Biden in the primaries and not Bernie back in 2020. They love Biden. So they're trying to portray Biden as a master of hardball politics. They are now saying, and I don't trust these people because they support Biden, but they are now saying Speaker McCarthy is back where he started, with a rebellious Republican caucus leaving his leadership in doubt. Remember, one of the concessions McCarthy made to secure support from far-right members of his caucus was a new rule that says all it takes is one Republican to call a vote on his speakership. One Republican like Lauren Boebert, and then who knows, another 15 rounds to pick a new speaker? Kevin McCarthy, some say, is in trouble tonight. He will not be able to hold the center, and if he can't hold the center in his party, he can't hold the speakership. And by center in the Republican Party, I mean far, far right. June 24th marks the one-year anniversary of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. That's Samuel Alito, who wrote the decision. The Economist reported on Monday that in the 3 months following the decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the number of men getting vasectomies jumped nearly 30%. Isn't that interesting? Men taking responsibility for birth control. Imagine that. The nation of Poland passed a law on Monday establishing a commission that will examine Russian interference in their elections between the years 2007 and 2022. The law opens the possibilities that any candidate who had received backing from Vladimir Putin would be permanently banned from holding public office again. Opponents of the new commission include former Polish Prime Minister, and this is his real name, Donald Tusk. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who has been accused of being subservient and a little too friendly towards Vladimir Putin when he, Donald Tusk, was the leader of Poland, as well as the walrus. He doesn't like to talk about it. That was supposed to be a secret. I bring this up because we have a lot of guests on this show who discount the role Vladimir Putin played in Trump winning in 2016. Now, there's no question that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats blew it in 2016. But there's also no question that Russia interferes in elections. There's no question also that America interferes in elections overseas. And since it's war criminal Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday, it's his 100th birthday because neither Satan nor God wants him. It's Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday, so we should mention that America overthrows countries like Chile when our efforts to interfere in an election over there fails. See, a lot of things can all be true at the same time. America does bad things. America does very, very, very bad things, but that doesn't make Vladimir Putin good. Newly elected Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance said on Monday he will no longer shop at Target because the retail chain is, quote unquote, waging war on its customers by selling merchandise that celebrates the LGBTQ lifestyle. All this from J.D. Vance, the Yale Law School graduate, who, before turning to right-wing politics, wrote Hillbilly Elegy, which documented the desperation of white Americans. Good for you, J.D. Vance. White Americans, especially men, your constituents, J.D. Vance, the ones you speak for, white Americans are committing suicide at record levels, overdosing on opiates at record numbers, dropping out of high school at record numbers, falling behind other ethnic groups. And how does J.D. Vance help his white constituents? By calling out Target for selling clothes that celebrate gay pride. Way to go, J.D. Vance, because that's going to create jobs and improve living conditions for all the desperate white men and women who voted for you. Trashing the LGBTQ community. That's what your white constituents desperately need right now. Well, the truth is, Senator J.D. Vance offers nothing for his white constituents who he wrote about in Hillbilly Elegy. He offers them nothing other than fanning the flames of resentment. But it's not class resentment. No, J.D. Vance does his corporate overlords' bidding by dividing the 99% along the lines of race or sexual preference. J.D. Vance won't help the people who voted for him. He won't help them where it counts. He wants work requirements for recipients of Medicaid and food stamps, which all those white Americans who voted for him need. He doesn't want his white constituents, his hillbillies that he writes about, who he writes about. He doesn't want his white constituents to get free health care, free mental health care, free treatment on demand for their addictions. He won't create jobs by juicing the economy with government spending. You see, J.D. Vance doesn't speak for the hillbillies he writes about. He speaks to them. He trains them to blame everyone for their miserable lives, except for the people who caused their misery. Their landlords, Wall Street, Big Pharma, who got them addicted to opiates, the Sackler family, or the health insurance companies that are killing them. The only help J.D. Vance offers his hillbilly constituents is advice on whom to hate, whom to beat up, whom to persecute, whom to feel more powerful than. J.D. Vance, Senator J.D. Vance, going after Target for celebrating gay pride has nothing to do with religious values or stopping the LGBTQ from grooming potential converts. It's all about keeping desperate white people, especially white men, in their place. It's about keeping them in their place by tricking them into hating and blaming all the wrong people. The LGBTQ community, migrants, black people, Jews, and foreigners, they're not making the hillbillies poor. And it's not the government making them poor. It's rich people who send charlatans like faux populist Yale Law School graduate J.D. Vance to Washington. And J.D. Vance, Senator J.D. Vance, works for his corporate donors, his wealthy donors, by convincing financially illiterate Republican voters that their enemy is the government or people who look and act differently. This is so tiresome, isn't it? Because we all know this. We all know this, except for the millions of morons who keep falling for this age-old trick. When you have nothing to offer voters, you preach hatred and intolerance. We all know this. The GOP has nothing to offer. While half this country can't come up with $1,000 for an emergency, J.D. Vance has nothing to offer his constituents. And I can assure you that it's more than half. I would say 75% of J.D. Vance's constituents, the people who voted for him, can't come up with $1,000 for an emergency. He has nothing to offer them other than hatred. It's the oldest trick in the book. It really is banal and trite. And like I said, it's tiresome talking about this all the time and reminding ourselves what the Republicans are up to. It's what Karl Rove and George W. Bush did in 2004. After George W. Bush wanted to get reelected, even though he invaded the wrong country, Iraq, and was losing the war. Now, Karl Rove, Bush's brain, knew conservative Republicans were disgusted by Bush's war in Iraq. So he put same-sex marriage on the ballot in several key swing states. Rove's idea was conservatives, Republicans who had it with Bush's failed war in Iraq, well, they would come to the polls to vote against the queers. And while they were already in the voting booth, as an afterthought, they would also say, what the hell, I'll vote for George W. Bush. It was the brainchild of Karl Rove. It worked. Bush won. It was the most homophobic election in the history of America. It was the brainchild of Karl Rove and this guy, chairman of the GOP, Kenny Mellman from Maryland. Kenny Mellman, who was in the closet at the time. He was not telling people that he was a homosexual, but he was chairman of the GOP, running the most homophobic election in the history of America. But he was in the closet at the time. He didn't want anyone to know he was a homosexual, beating up on his own people. Before becoming chairman of the Republican National Committee, before he was bashing gay people, Mellman was White House Director of Political Affairs for George W. Bush. And when he left the Bush White House to go run the RNC and beat up gay people, he was replaced by this guy, Matt Schlapp. Remember Matt Schlapp? I talked about him last week. He is now chairman of the American Conservative Union, and they run CPAC. Matt Schlapp replaced Ken Mellman in the Bush White House. Matt Schlapp, in case you forgot, last week, the treasurer of CPAC quit, claiming that donations to Matt Schlapp's CPAC were being diverted away from conservative causes and going towards the legal fees incurred by Matt Schlapp in the civil trial stemming from Matt Schlapp being accused of sexually assaulting a male campaign worker for Herschel Walker. Did I mention that Matt Schlapp has been accused of sexually assaulting a male campaign worker for Herschel Walker? Meanwhile, Matt Schlapp is also calling for a boycott of Target for its pro-LGBTQ stance. He calls it satanic. I talked about that last week. Matt Schlapp accused of sexually assaulting a man. Matt Schlapp. The ACLU says Republicans have introduced a record number of 491 anti-LGBTQ bills this year in state legislatures. Now, these are just not bills. These are permission slips to beat up gay people. This gets people killed or drives them into the closet underground and committing suicide. But Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz on Monday, he criticized Uganda's new anti-gay bill. Signed into law on Monday, Uganda's new anti-gay bill calls for the death penalty for those who engage in homosexual acts. And Ted Cruz says he's offended by the new anti-gay bill in Uganda. Really, Ted? You're against this new law on what grounds? Copyright infringement? Is that why you're against it? Uganda stole your homophobic ideas? Is that what's bothering you? Ted Cruz speaking out against Uganda's anti-gay laws. On Monday, Ted Cruz called Uganda's anti-gay law, quote unquote, horrific and wrong. And then he called on all civilized nations to join together in condemning this human rights abuse, unquote. That's what Ted Cruz said. I guess when African countries behave like Texas, Ted Cruz is offended. Where was Ted Cruz when his home state of Texas this month passed Senate Bill 14, restricting transgender medical care for minors? Did Ted call Greg Abbott, the governor, and tell him not to sign the bill? Texas lawmakers on Sunday passed a bill that would make drag queens subject to a year in prison and a $10,000 fine. But suddenly, the deeply religious Ted Cruz is worried about Uganda having a death penalty for homosexuals. Well, how do you think it all starts, Teddy? How do you think it starts? It starts with bills that target transgender youth or drag shows. It starts, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, it all starts with the very same people who put you in office, the Christian right. The Christian right here in America is partly responsible for this new draconian bill in Uganda that sentences homosexuals to death. According to Open Democracy, since 2007, American Christian groups, excuse me, I have a little phlegm, a little disgust for Ted Cruz and the Christian groups who support him and the execution of homosexuals in Uganda. According to Open Democracy, since 2007, American Christian groups have spent more than $54 million spreading anti-LGBTQ hatred throughout Africa, with some of these American Christian leaders helping Uganda draft its first Kill the Gays bill back in 2009. Remember the Kill the Gays bill back in 2009? Well, the Fellowship Foundation, that's a secret Christian organization here in America, they have spent $20 million in Uganda alone, with one of its employees literally writing 2009's Kill the Gays bill. Hundreds of millions of dollars raised by Christian groups, right-wing Christian groups here in America. Hundreds of millions are spent around the world combating not just abortion, but the use of contraception. And their opposition to contraception results in the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV, AIDS, especially in Africa. Ted Cruz's supporters are going to Africa and paying millions of dollars telling Africans, don't use a condom. Contraception is immoral. Basically, get AIDS instead. Now, this new law signed on Monday, it's in Uganda, it orders the death penalty for homosexuals. But Uganda already had some of the strictest anti-LGBTQ laws in the world, including life imprisonment. These draconian laws were passed in part with the help of American Christian groups, the very same Christian groups who give money to Ted Cruz, the same Christian groups who Ted Cruz prays with. Ted Cruz is appalled that Uganda is now going to start executing homosexuals. It's appalling, Ted, right? When you see your own constituents, your own platform come to fruition. It's appalling, it's frightening, it's scary, Ted. But relax, you'll get used to it. Kind of like January 6th, Ted. Remember the insurrectionists? Remember January 6th, Ted? They were disgusting and dangerous. You were appalled and frightened by them. And you had a brief moment of clarity on January 6th, and you realized these were your people. The same way the Ugandan leaders making homosexuality punishable by death are your people. But give it some time, Ted. Just like after the January 6th insurrectionists scared you for a while, you'll come around, just like you did with the January 6th insurrectionists. You'll come around. It takes a couple hours, but you'll come around and you'll defend them. And because you went to Harvard Law School, you'll portray them as the victims. The same way you ultimately portrayed the January 6th insurrectionists as the victims, if not heroes, even though at first you were disgusted by them. Trust me, you'll be amazed at how malleable your brain is. Eventually, in a few hours, you'll realize that the president of Uganda, who just signed the Kill the Gays bill, he's the victim in this. I know you'll get there. It's a little jarring at first to discover just how dangerous you are, but trust me, you get used to it, and then you embrace it. You embrace the hate and the violence. You'll get used to it. Last week, we reported on Dade County Public Schools in Florida banning Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, which the African-American writer read at President Biden's inauguration.
The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is.
Man, I hate poetry, but it shouldn't be banned. But I don't like poetry. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Why obfuscate? But, you know, Amanda Gorman is fantastic, and everybody should read The Hill We Climb. But thanks to new legislation pushed by Governor Ron DeSantis, or as I call him, the Marquis DeSantis, thanks to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, parents can play a much bigger role in what their idiot kids in Florida are being taught. And one idiot mother complained that Amanda Gorman's book was racist towards white people. So the Dade County School Board, thanks to Ron DeSantis, removed it from the shelves so elementary school students couldn't read it. Again, these are, Ron DeSantis is all about freedom of speech, and he's banning Amanda Gorman's poem. Well, we are now learning more about the idiot mother who got the book banned. Her name is Daily Salinas. And according to The Independent, that's a British newspaper, Daily Salinas has ties to the Proud Boys. Of course she does. How could she not? The Proud Boys, of course, a far-right street gang that celebrates, among other things, white pride. In 2021, wearing a Ron DeSantis t-shirt, Daily Salinas, that's the mom's name, she was photographed standing next to Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio at a rally protesting COVID-19 mask requirements. Enrique Tarrio, of course, now doing time for his involvement in the January 6th insurrection. See, it's all connected. It's all connected. The censorship, the book banning, the racism, COVID-19, being against the mask, being anti-vax. It's all part of one thread of stupidity. Daily Salinas, that's the idiot mother who got Amanda Gorman's poem banned. She's also attended other Proud Boy rallies. I don't know how she had the time to attend all these Proud Boy rallies when she was so busy working for Governor Ron DeSantis' Education Agenda Tour. That's what he's calling it. Ron DeSantis has a Education Agenda Tour, which promotes far-right candidates for local school boards. Salinas, Daily Salinas, has been thrown out of school board meetings for being disruptive in her objection to sex education being taught in the classrooms. I always say consider the source. You would think Dade County Public Schools, one of the largest school districts in America, when a mother comes screaming about Amanda Gorman's poem, wouldn't you consider the source and know this was about something more than what she said it was? Look, Uganda just made homosexuality punishable by death. Kill the gays legislation, that's what it is, kill the gays legislation, was funded by the very same white Christian believers who fund the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. It starts with a Don't Say Gay bill, and then it just gets out of hand, and if we don't stop it, it turns into a kill the gay bill. The same people who funded Ron DeSantis' Don't Say Gay bill in Florida are the same people who funded the Kill the Gays legislation in Uganda. They've been doing it since 2009. They finally got it passed. These are the same people who believe America is a white Christian nation. That's why there's an LGBTQ travel advisory now in Florida. It's too dangerous now for the LGBTQ community to visit Florida. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We could have substantive policy debates on how to solve climate catastrophe, how to improve our schools, how to actually teach our students in our schools instead of banning books. We could be talking about how to feed our children, how to provide free health care, mental health care, dental care, free, as well as free tuition at all public universities. We should be discussing this right now. We should be discussing ways to harness artificial intelligence so everyone can get free medical and legal advice. But we have a problem with the people at the top here in America, the billionaires. We have a problem because they hate us. They really hate us because they're miserable. Their penises don't work properly. That's a fact. That's why they're working so hard for their billions. They are sexually dysfunctional men. They must make women sign non-disclosure agreements, before having sex with them, because what it takes to make these men reach orgasm is so twisted, nobody can ever know. The real perverts, the real deviants, run our corporations and our political parties. They're incapable of healthy romantic relationships, so they surround themselves with power and mammon. But as we all know, it doesn't fill the void. Their idiot kids hate them, and they hate their idiot kids. And most importantly, they hate us, the rich and the powerful. And that's synonymous. You get power in America now by being a billionaire. They hate us. They think we're lazy. They think we're hypersexualized, and compared to them, we are. They think we're living lives of complacency while they have to do battle with their demons. They're possessed. They're elbowing everyone out of the way to get ahead, only to discover more demons inside of them, more self-loathing, more desperation, and of course, sexual dysfunction. These are the people, these billionaires control our politicians, our university, corporations, our healthcare, and sadly, more and more of them control our lives down here. It used to be they just wanted to exploit us. Now, they want us dead. They want us dead. When you look at our healthcare system, our for-profit healthcare system, when you look at the fossil fuel industry, they want us dead. When you look at the assault weapons business, how the manufacturers of weapons have found a new market, sick, crazy white men in their early 20s, and they will fight tooth and nail. They will fight us on an assault weapons ban because they want to sell assault weapons to crazy white men in their early 20s. They want us dead, and they're succeeding. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with having enough money so you don't have to worry about money, so you can do other things with your life. There is, however, something seriously diseased about anyone who can't stop hoarding money, keeping it from others. It is, for lack of a better word, satanic. It is satanic to hoard money for yourself. And here in America, instead of exercising these moral assassins from our community, we celebrate them. We celebrate the moral assassins, the sexually dysfunctional moral assassins. Let's start with the billionaires. Nobody should be allowed to live that way. Nobody. Let's start hating the billionaires. Let's wipe them out. Let's exterminate the billionaires. It can be done very simply by electing the right politicians and changing our tax code and taking their money from them and a redistribution of their wealth. Since Reagan, it's been flowing upwards. You know, the Trump tax cuts all go to the wealthy. Let's literally exterminate the billionaires before they exterminate us. Now, I don't know how to do it. I have some ideas. For example, only vote for politicians who will go on record saying billionaires must be exterminated because they are evil. Seems to me a reasonable question to ask of a politician. Nobody ever asks it. Are billionaires evil? Should they be exterminated? Yes or no? How would you exterminate them? Tax them out of existence. Get rid of the billionaires. Now, the minimum wage is $7.25. and it hasn't been raised since 2009. So what is that? It's been 14 years. Do the math. Minimum wage is $7.25. Work, what's 40 times $7.25? What is that? Times 5. I suspect slavery was more expensive than paying the minimum wage. Slavery, you had to provide housing, you had to feed your slaves, you had to hire people to make sure they didn't run away. I suspect $7.25, and you work 8-hour days, 5 days a week. I suspect slavery was more expensive than that. Now, I don't know what the maximum wage should be here in America. Not quite sure yet. I don't know how much is too much. I think we can all agree, definitely $1 billion is too much. We could go way down. But let's try this before we scare everybody into thinking I'm a socialist. First, we get rid of the billionaires. Anything you own over $1 billion, you can have 999,999,000, and then anything over that is taxed at 100%. Like during the Eisenhower years. Let's see if that gets the minimum wage up to, I don't know, $35, $40 an hour. If not, the maximum wage is $500 million. Anything over $500 million that you own, not just your salary, anything that you own over $500 million is taxed at 100%. And we just keep chopping and chopping and cutting rich people down until the minimum wage gets up to where it's livable. That's the first step, I think. The other suggestion is we need a cultural revolution in America. Hate the rich. I'm old enough to remember when you were supposed to hate the rich. Then, what was it, Robin Leach and Champagne Wishes and Caviar Dreams and Ronald Reagan, and all of a sudden, the rich and their kids, their idiot kids, became people we should celebrate? As a general rule of thumb, don't hate Jews. Don't hate Mexicans, Guatemalan refugees. Don't hate Black people, Arabs, Muslims, or the LGBTQ community. Let's all come together and hate the billionaires. And if that doesn't work, we start hating anybody who's worth more than $500 million. And we will just keep going down and hating rich people until we have some of their money. I think we could fix a lot of problems like climate change and income inequality and our schools and our hunger. And I think everybody would be able to come up with $1,000 for an emergency in this country. But there I go again, David Feldman, quoting Jesus Christ. What right does David Feldman have to quote Jesus Christ? My apologies. Please like this video. Please share it with your friends. We do office hours every Friday night at 8 p.m. And please join me. Subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you to the moderators who keep the chat room clean. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak.